he's totally exonerated. This whole Russian narrative the media's been running with has been a lie?
No! 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 No!
I saw someone post this clip of Sean Hannity on Sargon-of-Akkad's subreddit a while back, thinking it somehow justified Trump's wiretapping claims. And I'm here to explain to you why it does not. And if calling out Sean Hannity's dishonesty bothers you because you're a tribalistic team player, feel free to listen to me shit on Don Lemon instead.
An explosive new report raises very serious critical questions about U.S. government surveillance at Trump Tower, where our commander-in-chief's campaign headquarters were located. Now, these are questions that President Barack Obama needs to answer, and that is tonight's opening monologue.
So Sean's first and primary point revolves around the allegation that Obama spied on Trump during the campaign. Make sure you keep this in the back of your mind.
Investigative journalist Sarah Carter from Circa News will join us in just a minute. Now she, along with her colleague John Solomon, they have confirmed the existence of, in fact, a FISA court warrant order granted in October of 2016, just weeks before the general election, to monitor Trump Tower in there, a computer server that was right inside there. Now, the report finds that justification for the warrant was to examine the server that appeared to be communicating with a Russian bank. Officials told Circa News that they quickly determined that nothing, quote, was nefarious happening or going on there. Now, I can tell you from my own experience, now think about this, from my communications during the campaign with the Trump campaign, most of the staffers, 99% of them, were all connected to the Trump organization. In other words, their emails. This is beyond troubling. We need answers tonight. Were Trump campaign emails ever connected to the server? If so, were they collected as raw intelligence during this surveillance operation?
Sean's second point is that in October of 2016, journalists confirmed that a FISA warrant was ordered to monitor a computer server in Trump Tower. Sean says the warrant was granted to investigate a Russian bank, and officials determined that there was nothing nefarious going on there. He, however, does not explain what the investigation was even about. Basically, someone noticed the Russian bank Alpha, which has connections directly to Putin, which honestly in this day and age, what in Russia doesn't have connections to Putin, was constantly pinging a specific Trump server address. Supposedly, its constant pinging request made up 80% of all requests in a 10-month period made to that Trump server. And that is why it was being investigated in the first place. Now I'm gonna skip ahead for pacing's sake. I'll come back to this at the end, in case you think I'm trying to hide Sean's one fantastic point that negates what I'm saying.
Here now is Circa News national security correspondent Sarah Carter. Sarah, do I have all that right? Is that a good summary?
Yes, it was a great summary. There was one little change that just happened right before I came on your show, Sean. And what was really interesting, John and I spoke to some very senior U.S. officials. They clarified this. They said there was a FISA warrant in October that was looking at the overall Russian hacking investigation, but that the FBI, when they monitored the server, Trump Tower, it was actually located away from Trump Tower. It wasn't under the FISA. They did normal strategic type of FBI investigations that didn't require the FISA. So they went into the server, but they did not use the FISA to do that. They did have a FISA, however, in October at the exact same time as this investigation.
So there are two instances now.
Let's listen to that again. Very, very closely.
They said there was a FISA warrant in October that was looking at the overall Russian hacking investigation.
Okay, so number one, there is a FISA warrant involved in an overall Russian hacking investigation.
But that the FBI, when they monitored the server, Trump Tower, it was actually located away from Trump Tower. It wasn't under the FISA. They did normal strategic type of FBI investigations that didn't require the FISA. So they went into the server, but they did not use the FISA to do that. They did have a FISA, however, in October at the exact same time as this investigation.
So there are two instances now.
Number two, there was a completely separate investigation that didn't even legally require a FISA warrant, where the FBI was looking into a Russian bank that was pinging a Trump server that is not even physically located in Trump Tower. And even though she didn't mention it, it's also not even located in New York State.
There was one little change.
That is not a little change. In the beginning of the report, Sean had conflated the two separate investigations into one.
They did have a FISA, however, in October at the exact same time as this investigation.
And because these investigations were happening simultaneously, that means something nefarious? Is the FBI only allowed to have one open investigation at a time? Sean, however, does his best to transform this information to fit his already constructed narrative.
So there are two instances now of spying.
Two.
Actually, we have two separate investigations, both which they have yet to provide any evidence were conducted in an illegal or unethical manner.
Yes,
wow.
Two instances. So this is completely new evidence. And remember, we all thought, and everybody had reported, that the server was inside Trump Tower. The server was not located in Trump Tower, according to our sources.
With the second issue warrant, whatever the FBI was doing, was that in Trump Tower?
Notice how as soon as she explains that the server isn't even in Trump Tower, which hurts Sean's entire narrative, he immediately moves off of it to this second investigation, which, spoiler alert, they don't know shit about.
With the second issue warrant, whatever the FBI was doing, was that in Trump Tower?
That's what we don't know now. Because now that opens up a whole slew of questions, the questions you just brought up in your monologue, right? So those questions need to be answered. But what we do know is this.
She admits they don't know anything, but they do an excellent job playing off their lack of knowledge as some sort of dramatic conspiracy.
The people that were investigating Trump's server, they said that the FBI did not look into emails, they did not listen to his phone calls, and that they found no evidence at all of any type of crime associated with Trump business.
This is important what you're saying.
Okay, so what exactly did she just say? She said, in relation to the investigation of the Russian bank, the FBI did not look into Trump's emails and did not listen into Trump's phone calls. So this seems to completely destroy Sean's original narrative, that a U.S. intelligence service was spying on the Trump campaign using this investigation into a Russian bank as some sort of cover. However, listen to Sean's masterful pivot.
The news media in this country has repeated this narrative that the Trump campaign were colluding with the Russians to undermine the electoral process. You're saying that you're reporting and look, John Solomon's worked for AP for what, 20 years, and you both worked together at the Washington Times, credible news organizations. So what you're saying is they found no evidence at all whatsoever of any collusion between the campaign and the Russians. True?
Wrong.
Holy fucking shit. What a colossal fucking leap Sean just made. The investigation was into this one very specific incident of a Trump server being pinged repeatedly by a Russian bank. Mind you, Sean has yet to even explain what the fuck the bank investigation is even about to his audience. And all she said was that in this very specific incident, they found no evidence that the Trump organization was doing anything criminal in regards to this Russian bank pinging their server. Yet Sean has somehow completely warped this information into somehow meaning that the FBI has exonerated the Trump administration from all accusations of colluding with Russia. Jesus fucking Christ.
Absolutely true. They found no evidence of that. In fact,
interesting that she says
absolutely true,
but then modifies it with
they found no evidence of that.
At first you may think I'm making a distinction in her words. That doesn't exist. But this comes up again later.
When we spoke to our sources who had direct access to this investigation, what was happening with the FBI, they didn't even find evidence of collusion with Lieutenant General Mike Flynn.
So what she just said is that the investigation into the Russian bank showed no evidence of Michael Flynn colluding with the Russians. Why the fuck would an investigation into a Russian bank pinging a Trump server have fuck all to do with Michael Flynn?
Which is interesting because even when those leaks came out and they were referring to the Logan Act and everybody saw this as part of a broad... Yeah, they thought this was part of the original investigation into Russian hacking and now President Trump. It wasn't. It was completely different. It was a completely separate incident, and the leak came out anyways. It was monitoring of Russian
and that would be
assets.
A felon.
This again destroys Sean's entire narrative. Sean's entire narrative in the beginning of this segment is about how U.S. intelligence agencies were spying on Trump. And that's based around the idea that the Obama administration requested a FISA warrant to spy on Trump Tower during the election, possibly under the guise of investigating a Russian bank. And so far, what we have learned is 1. The FISA warrant was for a completely different investigation that we don't even know if it had to do with Trump. 2. The server isn't even physically located in Trump Tower. It's not even in the same state, so we don't even know if anyone from the Trump campaign used it at all. 3. The investigation into the server did not look into Trump's emails or phone calls. And 4. The investigation presumably found no criminal activity from the Trump organization's end in regards to being pinged repeatedly by a Russian bank. These first 3 points completely destroy Sean's narrative, so he ignores them and then tries to warp the 4th point into meaning something it doesn't.
And the leak came out anyways. It was monitoring of Russian assets.
And that would be a felony as defined by the Espionage Act, as I understand it?
That is absolutely correct. And
Wrong.
as you know, the Inspector General at the DOJ is now investigating both the FBI and the Department of Justice.
Very important. I want to stay on this story because we only have limited time. There's too much information in your piece and your new discovery. So you have confirmed that the FBI found no evidence of any collusion whatsoever. Nothing.
No collusion. What a broad statement. iOS, intentional or stupid? Is Sean an idiot, or did he intentionally make his statement so vague in order to trick his viewers into thinking that this somehow proves there was no collusion between Russia and Trump in any regards?
Number 2,
Absolutely.
You have confirmed that they did get a FISA warrant in October in the weeks leading up to the election.
Yes, they got a FISA warrant to look into overall Russian hacking. What does that specifically mean? I don't know. Because they haven't fucking told us.
Correct?
That is correct.
And
that
they
is
also
correct.
and they also got somehow another warrant that allowed them to look into the Trump campaign. We don't know what the nature of that was.
Now I'm beginning to think maybe Sean isn't intentionally lying, he's just stupid. It seems to me in his zealousness to prove his narrative, he's mixed up the investigations and still thinks the FISA warrant was about the Russian bank and that this second vague investigation was about Trump, when in fact it's the exact opposite.
We think it had to do with the banks in Russia, that they were looking at connections between then President Trump and the banks in Russia, both which are Alpha Bank and SVB Bank. But we're not 100% certain on that.
Now I want you to notice how she immediately jumps to the other investigation with almost no explanation or pause that she's doing it.
And the banks in Russia, both which are Alpha Bank and SVB Bank. But we're not 100% certain on that. What we don't know is who was connected to that FISA. What was that FISA looking at? And that is very highly classified. Nobody wants to talk about that particular FISA right now. They said it did have to do with the Russian hacking on a very broad level, but it didn't hone in directly on Trump, is what I was told.
So the FISA investigation has to do broadly with Russian hacking, and we know fuck all about it, except it supposedly does not specifically hone in on Trump. Does that mean Trump was investigated, but just not the focus of the investigation? Does that mean Trump wasn't looked into at all? I don't know, because they haven't fucking told us. All I know is that Sean's narrative is crumbling by the second.
And the bottom line, too, is so far they found no collusion whatsoever, which I think is really important.
Again, the faulty collusion point. Now prepare yourself for some amazing mental gymnastics.
And, you know, we don't know the degree to which, if they went to a server that might have been off-site, but it still took in the information from Trump Tower, then Donald Trump probably was, it's seemingly technically right.
Somehow Trump's technically right because the FBI had a warrant to investigate an off-site server, which they don't even know if the Trump organization used in any personal or campaign-related capacity. So somehow this translates into Obama tapping his phone or spying on him during the campaign.
This guy will say anything.
The New York Times used the term wiretapping. Now they're backtracking. But everybody in the media has called Donald Trump a liar when he sent out a tweet about President Obama being involved. Well, certainly it's his administration.
Fantastic. So Sean's defense is that the president of the greatest country on the planet should be held to the same standards as the New York Times when it comes to making explosive allegations about a former president committing a crime on the same level as the Watergate break-in.
And maybe, I don't know exactly how you call a wiretap. Does it have to be a phone call? If the government's looking into one server, can't you say they were tapping into it? Because that's how I would define it.
Yeah, but you're an idiot and a partisan shill, Sean. And you're also not the fucking president.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are semantics, right? This is how people are using words. There is a distinction between a FISA and then a wiretapping, but they did tap. I mean, they were looking
They were
into
investigating the
semantics. Not like you're trying to use semantics and vagueness to conflate the FBI looking into a random server in Philadelphia with Obama spying on the Trump campaign by bugging Trump Tower while simultaneously exonerating Trump of everything.
They were investigating the president in the weeks leading up to the election, and you're saying there were two warrants, one FISA, one non-FISA.
No! They weren't investigating Trump.
They were investigating a fucking Russian bank pinging a Trump server, and they don't even know if the FISA warrant investigation had fuck all to do with Donald Trump.
Correct.
Okay, so now did they find anything at all? Anything at all?
According to the sources that we spoke with, they did not find any evidence that would lead to any kind of criminal prosecution of anyone on the Trump team. And that is what we were told.
Yeah, Sean, if she just keeps repeating the same point, maybe it will confuse some people.
So basically, you're told by people that he's totally exonerated. This whole Russian narrative the media's been running with has been a lie. It's been untrue, and that they've known it for some time, and they never told us.
Well, to some extent, yes.
Some genius wordplay from Sarah. She doesn't want to say to Sean on live TV, "No! What the fuck are you talking about?" So she uses the nice vague, "to some extent."
That's pretty scary.
Yeah, Sean. The fact that someone as stupid and dishonest as you has a job on cable television is pretty scary.
Now, one other thing, because I think this is very important. As it relates to who knew what, when, and where, the president made a very clever statement. He said, well, I didn't order, nor did anyone in the White House order the FISA investigation. But that's not an acknowledgement. Did he know?
It's true. Obama specifically said he didn't order surveillance, which does give Obama room that he could have still known about it if it actually went on. But Sean starts throwing out all sorts of ridiculous claims, based on absolutely fucking nothing, because they don't even know if the FISA investigation had anything to do with Trump, and the bank investigation was completely unrelated to the Trump campaign.
Did Ben Rhodes know? Did Loretta Lynch sign off on it? Did any Valerie Jarrett know about this? Did Dan Pfeiffer?
Did Obama know the FBI had a FISA warrant to look into the general Russian hacking? I would assume so. But what does that have to do with Trump?
In the middle of a campaign, you have a sitting president with the power of the intelligence community looking into an opposition candidate in the weeks leading up to an election. Does that seem like something that is appropriate? Were there lies told to gather that Pfizer approval?
Hey, I'm just a normal kid. Like you, except that I ask questions.
Do we know if there was an attempt to get one in June, for example?
Well, what we know is that, according to our sources, there was really no attempt to get one in June. Now, that's what they said. We don't know that for fact yet.
Another talking point scratched off.
But what we do know is that in October, it was very interesting. Harry Reid came out and said, you know, there's going to be some explosive
Hillary Clinton tweeted
evidence.
it out a week before the election.
Hillary Clinton tweeted that out. So people were getting a whiff of this, and we believe that people were briefed on this. So this is when everything started. And this is what these intelligence officials are telling us. Look, this has become highly politicized from October all the way through January with the removal of General Flynn from the NSA. You know, this has become so politicized that they're watching this in horror, and they wanted to set the record straight.
I have one last question. We did learn from WikiLeaks that the CIA uses stolen malware to give attribution, if you will, to cyber attacks to other nations. In other words, they leave the fingerprints. They could do the job and leave the fingerprints and say, oh, it looks like the Russians did it. Is that possible that happened here?
Gee, Sean, I don't know. Is it possible you're not actually a man, but a life-size puppet that Trump personally shoves his hand up your ass and uses to broadcast propaganda?
I mean, that's something that we have to investigate. I have no evidence of that, but they are capable. They are capable.
I agree.
Thank you for your great work. We're going to continue to follow this, get these questions answered.
So remember Sean's very first point?
An explosive new report raises very serious critical questions about U.S. government surveillance at Trump Tower, where our commander-in-chief's campaign headquarters were located. Now, these are questions that President Barack Obama needs to answer, and that is tonight's opening monologue.
The entire purpose of this segment was supposed to give credence to the idea that Obama was spying on Trump during the campaign. And yet the very moment Sarah comes on and destroys that entire narrative, Sean immediately pivots away from that point and starts trying to claim that this reporting somehow proves that the Trump organization is cleared from all charges of collusion with the Russian government, which her reporting doesn't show at all. Now all we need is for Sean and Don to have a dishonest off to see exactly who is the champion of manipulating information. Now let's go back and look at what I cut out in the beginning.
We need answers tonight. Were Trump campaign emails ever connected to the server? If so, were they collected as raw intelligence during this surveillance operation? Now, the reason we ask this is because of what we saw happen to former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. Remember news reports? A December call that he made to a Russian ambassador was captured by what the New York Times described as a, quote, routine wiretap of the Russian diplomat's phone. Well, U.S. intelligence agencies, they do routinely monitor foreign officials. That's their job. But protections, known as minimization procedures, have been put in place to ensure that American citizens are not caught up in that surveillance. In other words, they then would have no constitutional rights, and that their identities and their rights are protected. Now, this, of course, was not the case with Lieutenant General Flynn.
So Sean questions why the surveillance that picked up Michael Flynn was not minimized. This is actually a good question. The only piece of good reporting for Sean in the entire segment. The question still remains unanswered, and in an unprecedented move, the FBI and CIA have not responded to the House Intel Committee's request for answers on this issue. Of course, Sean immediately bungles that good faith with his next point.
Because a transcript of the call was created, given to intelligence officials, who then leaked the details to the press, which, by the way, is a felony according to the Espionage Act.
The color of this pen is red.
This is nowhere near as definitive as Sean leads us to believe. The Espionage Act states, The N part is the key. Used to the injury of the US or advantage of a foreign nation. But if Flynn lied to the vice president, as the Trump administration claims, and thus the Trump administration fired him because of that, how exactly does leaking that info hurt the US or help a foreign nation? The leak supposedly notified the White House that Flynn lied to them. Wouldn't that help the country and the administration? Unless, of course, the administration knew he was lying from the beginning and just wanted to use Flynn as the fall guy when that information came out.
But hey, I'm just a normal kid.
We also know from a New York Times report that in his final weeks in office, that President Obama revised the Executive Order 12333, which greenlights widespread sharing of raw data collected by American intelligence agencies across 17 government agencies. That's an additional 16 agencies. All their employees can now gain access to top secret intel that they never had access to before. Now, we've been asking, why did President Obama wait until the last minute, 2 weeks before he leaves, to issue that order? It's an order that he did not apply to himself for 8 years. And since this order was signed, well, we've seen an explosion of leaks coming from intelligence agencies. Look at your screen right there. Now take a good look at it.
Not surprisingly, Sean does a crap job explaining this as well. Before this executive order, the NSA would regulate all the raw information they captured themselves. Other US intelligence agencies had to ask the NSA for that data. Then the NSA would go through the data, determine what they believed was relevant to the request, and give the other agencies filtered data. All the change does now is allow the NSA to give whatever raw data directly to that agency instead of filtering it themselves. Now, could there be some privacy and oversight concerns with that? Yes. But it also seems to me that the US intelligence agencies should all be sharing whatever information they collect anyways. The NSA may not always be able to determine what is relevant to another agency's request. While I agree that it is strange that Obama would enact this change so late in his presidency instead of early on, but it's entirely speculation that this change is related to the leaks. However, I do agree that it does merit an investigation.
So given what's happened, it's time for President Obama and officials who oversaw this operation and the surveillance of the server at Trump Tower, they need to come clean. What did they know? What information was gathered? They need to assure you, the American people, that this was not spying on a political opposition party just weeks before an election. All of this raises very serious national security, ethical issues at a very high level, privacy issues we've never had before, because crimes were likely committed here. Certainly in the case of retired Lieutenant General Flynn, somebody committed a felony. Wrong. So all we're doing on the show is we're raising questions. We're looking for answers. In fact, we have reached out to President Obama's spokesperson to see if they would respond to the questions we've been asking. Shocking. So far, we've not heard back. Also tonight, WikiLeaks has released thousands of documents and is making very serious allegations about CIA spying capabilities and techniques.
I'm going to skip ahead a bit for time's sake. I assume everyone already knows what the Vault 7 leak showed.
In other words, they can make it seem like it's the Russians and it's them. Now, the power and capabilities of American intelligence agencies are profound, and they are extensive. And if all of this is true, what that means is a possibility that an operative working on behalf of the former president and other left-wing activists are trying to sabotage, delegitimize President Donald Trump. After all, why did the leaks happen as soon as Obama left? Until we get answers, we're going to keep asking these questions.
But hey, I'm just a normal.
So with absolutely no solid evidence, a news commentator suggests that a rogue element planted false information dependent on the Russians after the fact. All this based on zero evidence. Now, isn't it funny how the narrative has changed? It used to be every single US intelligence agency is lying about the hack being Russian. Now it's, oh, they're not lying, it's just that some rogue element of the CIA planted false evidence blaming the Russians. This illustrates part of the problem. These people are not honestly looking for the truth. These are people looking for a specific answer that fits their narrative. And remember, This is why it's so important to listen very closely to the exact words used by politicians and media outlets, because all too often they specifically talk in these vague, general ways, so that viewers will be confused by what they're saying and leap to conclusions based on their own preconceived notions.